She has been dead for 3 days. There is something wrong with these photographs. You can feel it before you can name it. The faces are too still. The eyes are too wide. The expressions carry no warmth, no flicker of the present moment. Only a kind of permanent vacancy, as though whoever stood before the camera had already left the room. For over a century, historians and casual observers alike have looked at these images and asked the same quiet, unsettling question. Why do so many people in 1800s photographs look dead? The simple answer, the one you'll find in a textbook, is exposure time, long shutter speeds, the need to hold still. But the simple answer, as it so often does, hides something far stranger. Because when you dig past the technical explanations, when you start reading the journals, the newspaper columns, the letters of the photographers themselves, you find that some of these people in these photographs actually were. To understand what was happening in these photographs, you have to understand the world that made them. It is 1839. Louis Daguerre has just unveiled his process to a stunned Parisian public. For the first time in human history, light itself can be trapped. Reality can be frozen. A face, a specific, particular, unrepeatable face, can be preserved not in oil and canvas, which requires wealth and weeks in a trained artist, but in silver and sunlight, in a matter of minutes. The world goes mad for it. Within a decade, Daguerreotype studios have opened in every major city in America and Europe. By the 1850s, photographs are being taken by the millions. By the 1860s, the Civil War is being documented in ways no conflict in human history has ever been documented before. But here is the problem. Here is the technical reality that shapes everything. Early photographic processes require extraordinary amounts of light and time. A daguerreotype exposure in the 1840s could take anywhere from 15 seconds to several minutes. Even by the 1860s and 70s, exposures of 5 to 30 seconds were common for portrait photography. 5 to 30 seconds. Think about that. Think about how long you can hold a smile. A genuine, comfortable, natural smile before your face begins to ache. Photographers quickly discovered that asking their subjects to smile produced grotesque results. Lips trembled, eyes watered. What had started as joy by the end of the exposure looked more like a grimace of pain. And so the convention emerged. You did not smile for a photograph. You composed yourself. You became, for the duration of that long silver moment, something more like a statue than a person. This explains the expressions. It explains the stillness, the rigid posture, the forward gaze into a middle distance that seems to lead nowhere. But it does not explain the head clamps. Photographers of the 19th century employed a device called a posing stand, or head brace. It was, in essence, a metal armature of the living what they were seeing. Or perhaps the families already knew. Perhaps the line between the living portrait and the death portrait was, for a certain class of Victorian photographer, simply a question of which subjects held still more easily. There are accounts, buried in letters, in studio logbooks, in the diaries of photographers' assistants, of studios that specialized in both, sometimes on the same day, of posing stands that were cleaned between clients not with water, but with something stronger, of photographers who, when asked by a grieving widow to make her husband look alive, replied simply, "I always do." But this is only the surface layer of the strangeness, because there is a deeper question, one that the historians of photography rarely ask aloud. If post-mortem photography was so common, if it was advertised, practiced, mainstream, then why did it almost completely disappear from the historical record? By the early 20th century? Why, when researchers began cataloging Victorian photographs in the 1970s and 80s, did they find that so many had been mislabeled? That so many post-mortem portraits had been submitted to archives as ordinary family photographs with no notation, no indication, no record of what the image actually showed? Who removed the labels? There is a theory, not widely published, but discussed in certain corners of photographic history, that the normalization of the dead-looking portrait was not entirely accidental. That photographers, studio owners, and eventually the broader commercial photographic industry recognized, sometime around the 1870s, that their living clients were indistinguishable in the final image from their dead ones. That the conventions they had developed, the rigid posture, the blank expression, the fixed forward gaze, had inadvertently created a visual language that erased the boundary between the living and the dead, and that some of them, rather than correcting this, leaned into it. Because a portrait that looked like a post-mortem portrait had a particular power, A solemnity, a permanence. It looked, in an age before cinema and television, like something eternal, like something that would last. By the 1880s, the conventions were so ingrained that subjects arriving at portrait studios didn't need to be told to stop smiling. They already knew. Children were coached by their parents. Adults understood instinctively that the correct photographic posture was the posture of a person who had stopped feeling anything. The photographic portrait and the death portrait had become visually the same thing. And when you go back now, when you look at those boxes of old photographs, those sepia faces in oval frames, those family albums that your grandmother kept but never opened, you look at them differently. You look at the eyes, whether they are focused or not. You look at the hands, whether they rest naturally or too perfectly. You look at the neck, whether it has been positioned or whether it has simply settled. And you realize that you don't actually know. You can't know. The image won't tell you. That was the point. In 1900, Kodak released the Brownie camera. Portable, affordable, simple. Within 5 years, ordinary families across America and Europe could take their own photographs. Candid photographs. Photographs of people laughing, moving, caught off guard. Post-mortem photography faded. The long exposure was gone. The posing stand was gone. And with them went the need to make the living look like the dead. But the photographs remained. All those boxes, all those albums, all those flat, unreadable eyes staring out of silver and time. And no one thought to go back and check.